Let me explain to you how Ghislaine Maxwell has already outmaneuvered the Trump regime, and the deal essentially has already been done to allow her potentially to walk free. And I'm not just talking about Donald Trump dangling a pardon in front of her. I think that's a possibility, but the pardon's not going to happen anytime soon. Remember how everybody talks about the sweetheart deal that Epstein entered into in 2008, the NPA, the non-prosecution agreement, which also included the co-conspirators of Epstein, gave them a non-prosecution deal as well. Remember that? Well, we've just seen another sweetheart deal in plain view. Now, it's not called a non-prosecution agreement, but it might as well be, because the immunity grant that the Department of Justice gave to Ghislaine Maxwell at the end of last week, where they met with her for 10 hours on Thursday and Friday, where they gave her what's called use immunity or proffer immunity, that needs to be viewed in the context of what happened yesterday when Ghislaine Maxwell filed her brief before the United States Supreme Court, arguing that the 2008 non-prosecution agreement between the DOJ and Jeffrey Epstein means that her sex trafficking case should be dismissed. And why I say you need to, her conviction rather, where she's serving 20 years in Tallahassee. And what I mean they need to be viewed in the same context together is there's a reason that it was filed so soon and the meeting happened when it happened. Obviously, one of the reasons the meeting happened was because Congress subpoenaed Ghislaine Maxwell to have her deposition taken, and Donald Trump wanted to get there first. But also, I think that Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyers, this guy, David Oscar Marcus, who's her lawyer, he's got a good reputation in Florida as a good lawyer. I hate that he's representing her, but he's known at least as a good lawyer there. He's very close to Todd Blanche. I think Ghislaine's legal team feels that the Supreme Court is going to grant what's called certiorari, and they're going to hear her case, and that the Supreme Court, right-wing Supreme Court, that's made horrible rulings, may end up ultimately reversing the conviction against Ghislaine Maxwell and setting her free based on the non-prosecution agreement. Now, I'll show you what went down, but now just think about it this way. Let's say the Supreme Court says, Ghislaine, you're free to walk. There was a non-prosecution agreement entered with Jeffrey Epstein back in 2008 for him and all co-conspirators. You're a co-conspirator. That should have applied to you as well. The Southern District of New York Federal Court should not have allowed the prosecution against you to proceed. Your conviction gets overturned. So the Trump regime DOJ is not going to prosecute Ghislaine again, but I want you to think about it. Could a future Department of Justice want to prosecute Ghislaine Maxwell, not in her capacity as an Epstein co-conspirator per se, but based on her own independent sex trafficking or her own individual conduct? Now, if they want to do that, if her case ends up being reversed and she gets let free, she's going to argue, hey, future Department of Justice, you can't prosecute me. Why? Because I've been given use immunity or queen for the day immunity or proffer immunity from the Department of Justice when Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney, met with me in July of 2025. So now the additional sex trafficking conduct can't be subject to a future prosecution. And by the way, those future charges don't have any statute of limitations that would have expired by now. And so that conduct has now essentially been immunized as a result of this meeting. Now, there's something else that went down as well as part of what I believe is the sweetheart deal. And I'm going to go through the documents with you. I just want to lay out the case of, I think, what happened here. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, in their brief to the Supreme Court, asking the Supreme Court to reverse or overturn her conviction, they say that even the government, even the DOJ concedes that the DOJ position is weak. The DOJ concedes that there's what's called a circuit court split on the issue of whether a Department of Justice branch in one state can bind Department of Justice branches in the other state. As it relates to her case, can the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Alex Acosta, who went on to become Donald Trump's labor secretary, the deal he made with Epstein in 2008 in Florida, can that apply to prosecutions in New York, to preclude or prohibit prosecutions in New York or anywhere else? Now, the New York federal judge said, nope, the Florida deal with Epstein and co-conspirators, that only relates to Florida. It doesn't relate to prosecutions in New York. And so Ghislaine's argument is, well, that doesn't make sense. If you're a United States attorney and you work for the DOJ and you're in Florida, that should bind you in New York as well. New York's law, the Second Circuit law, says, nope, New York can do its own thing. But there are other states and other jurisdictions, other circuit courts, which are the courts of appeals, which say, no, it's absolutely binding on New York. And the more right-leaning courts, the more right-leaning circuit courts would side with Ghislaine. And because we have a right-leaning, you get what I'm saying here, Supreme Court, Ghislaine's lawyers are pretty confident. I think they're going to prevail before the Supreme Court. And I think they got the Department of Justice to file a pretty weak brief to the Supreme Court, knowing that the weak brief would invite Supreme Court scrutiny and find that Ghislaine's case should be first heard, and then they may even reverse it. So one of the things that I'm going to posit, in my opinion, as part of this overreaching deal between the DOJ and Ghislaine Maxwell, were certain things done in public and then certain things done quietly behind the scenes. I think the DOJ agreed. This is my opinion. I can't say this for a fact, but I study these things. I was a practicing lawyer at a high level for about 13, 14 years or so. So I've been able to analyze these things. I'm not practicing anymore, but I was able to, analyze these things. And I think the DOJ filed a bad brief with the Supreme Court because they want to lose. And then Ghislaine's lawyer said, look, even the DOJ conceded that they have a weak position. Supreme Court hear it. Supreme Court reverse Ghislaine's conviction. Ghislaine gets set free. Can she be prosecuted again? Nope. Why? She was granted use or proffer immunity while she was incarcerated in Tallahassee prison by Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney, now the number 2 at the DOJ. So she has the peace of mind that she won't be prosecuted again. She gets double protection, non-prosecution agreement, plus immunity, queen for a day treatment. And I think ultimately there was a wink and a nod between Donald Trump's DOJ, Todd Blanche, and Ghislaine's lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, of, hey, we'll look to, potentially pardon Ghislaine in 3 years when Donald Trump's term is up. But the deal, the sweetheart deal, I think just happened in plain view during the meeting that just took place. So let me go through it with you just so you can see specifically that I'm not speculating here. You take a look at Ghislaine Maxwell's petition to the United States Supreme Court for certiorari filed yesterday. And here's what she says in the brief. This case presents a straightforward and important question about the government's obligation to honor its promises in plea and non-prosecution agreements. The petition asks whether a U.S. attorney's promise made on behalf of the United States, that's Trump's former labor secretary, Alex Acosta, when he was the United States attorney in 2008, binds the entire United States. The government's brief in opposition only underscores the importance of this question. In other words, she's saying what the government is saying really means, Supreme Court, we need you to get involved. Why would the government's brief underscore the question? They should try to repudiate the question. And here's what Ghislaine says in her brief. Most significantly, the government concedes a circuit split on the issue, effectively admitting that defendants' rights hinge on the happenstance of geography. Such an acknowledged conflict among the circuits demands this court's intervention. Now you go and you look at subsection 1 of this brief. What's it labeled? The government, meaning the Trump DOJ, concedes that the circuits are split as to whether a promise on behalf of the United States by a United States Attorney's Office in one district is binding upon other districts. When have you seen the Trump DOJ concede on anything? They make up stuff. They don't concede on Abrego Garcia being returned right away to the United States. They don't concede on sending people to concentration. They don't concede on birthright citizenship in the Constitution. They don't concede on very basic rights. They don't concede. But when it comes to Ghislaine, they concede? They concede that the Supreme Court should, that's not fishy to you? That's why I'm reading this for you. The government agrees that there is a clear circuit split on the precise question posed by the petition. Again, when is the Trump, this is the moment they agree with the opposition? As the Second Circuit noted, this conflict is well documented and long-standing. Indeed, the government points out that litigants have sought the court's clarification of this issue at least as far back as 2011, when this court denied certiorari in Prisco versus United States. So why is the DOJ pointing out to the Supreme Court that they previously denied certiorari in 2011, but it now remains unsettled law that they could hear right now? It seems like the DOJ is saying, wink, wink, the composition of the Supreme Court's different than it was in 2011. You all have been overturning your prior precedent. Why don't you hear this now? To which Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer says, this case is an ideal vehicle for resolving the split over this important and recurring question. Now, you then have the meeting that just took place between Ghislaine, her lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney, former number 2 at the DOJ. And following that meeting, Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer says she's undecided on appearing for congressional testimony. So the House Oversight Committee subpoenaed her deposition. So it seems, what I predict is going to happen, that she'll invoke her Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination and not answer questions from Congress. But she will answer questions from Trump's DOJ. I think that's part of the deal as well, whether expressed or implied. Again, I'm just giving you my opinion with a little wink and a nod. I think she goes silent when it comes to Congress. And then you go, well, how could she go silent with Congress and speak to the DOJ? Well, the congressional version of immunity is less settled than the DOJ's version of immunity. And then in any event, Congress would refer her prosecution to the Department of Justice. And is the Department of Justice going to prosecute her? No, the DOJ is going to say she cooperated with us. We feel confident in her participation, and we thought our proffer session with her is enough. We don't think she needs to speak to Congress. That's part of the overall cover-up that, in my mind, is taking place. But Donald Trump still has to dangle the pardon to her, right? Trump has to dangle the pardon to her because he still needs her to play ball with Congress and a few other elements. So Trump was asked in Turnberry, Scotland, at his golf course, while Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, was there, are you considering a pardon of Ghislaine Maxwell? And Trump's response is like, I'm allowed to give her a pardon. Here, play this clip.
Mr. President, you completely rule out a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell when you landed. Is that something you would ever consider, and why?
Pardon for who?
For Ghislaine Maxwell.
Well, I'm allowed to give her a pardon, but nobody's approached me with it. Nobody's asked me about it. It's in the news about that aspect of it, but right now it would be inappropriate to talk about it. So.
And then when Trump is asked about just a random question about Epstein, he's not asked about the island. Donald Trump then responds by saying, I was never at the island. I never had the privilege of going there. Weird thing for him to say, the privilege of going there. But I think there Donald Trump is also signaling to Ghislaine, look, That's what you need to say. And focus on everybody else who was at the island, not me. Meanwhile, Donald Trump lived 2 blocks away from the sex traffickers, Ghislaine and Epstein, who went to Mar-a-Lago and they would find girls at Mar-a-Lago, like Virginia Giuffre was one example of that. Or they'd bring over a 14-year-old girl, a victim, to Mar-a-Lago. So we know that was taking place. Let me just show you again what Donald Trump said about never having the privilege to go to Epstein's island. Here, play this clip.
And by the way, I never went to the island, and Bill Clinton went there supposedly 28 times. I never went to the island, but Larry Summers, I hear, went there. He was the head of Harvard, and many other people that are very big people. Nobody ever talks about them. I never had the privilege of going to his island, and I did turn it down, but a lot of people in Palm Beach were invited to his island. In one of my very good moments, I turned it down. I didn't want to go to his island.
So folks, that's just me piecing it together. I think it's happening in plain view that the deal's been struck. And I know well, they gave her immunity. But no, they gave her a version of the non-prosecution agreement in 2007 right now, in case the Supreme Court sets her free, that she can't be prosecuted for independent acts. So she put it all out on the line so that she can't be prosecuted by future DOJs in exchange, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, for her silence as it relates to Donald Trump. But here's the thing, folks, don't get distracted by this crap. We don't care about what Ghislaine Maxwell is saying. We never ask for what convicted sex traffickers are saying, who have been described by the DOJ in 2022 as complete and total liars. Don't lose sight of what we're asking for are the files where Donald Trump's name appears multiple times. That's what we want to see. The files, the 300 gigabytes. Show us that. I hope this made sense to you of tying together what's the dirty deal that happened. But let me know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 6 million. Thanks for watching.
The truth is more important than ever. Check out our new Truth Over Lies collection at store.MeidasTouch.com. All 100% USA union made.